You got 1, 2, I'll post the right one online. All right, everybody, let's get started. I just wanted to give you a preview of the exam today, just so you have an understanding of like what's on the exam, like how it's structured for you, and then answer questions for you. Obviously, the exam isn't going to be, if you're in block 5, your test is a week from Monday. If you're in block 2, your test isn't until a week from next Thursday. So there's lots of time between now and the exam. But I did want to sort of go over with you sort of what's on the exam and sort of give you an overview of how the exam is structured, so you can understand like how to best prepare. So the exam itself is actually 3 parts. The exam is set up into 3 different sections. So the first section of the exam, which will happen in our class during the exam block, which will be the first 45 minutes of the test session, is a game that I made up a few years ago called History Survivor. History Survivor is actually really fun, like competitive game. If you've ever seen the show Survivor, you know that the object of the game is sort of people get voted out and eventually you're left with one sole survivor at the end. The way this will work in our class is that there will end up being one team out of 4 that is left at the end of the game. And the team that ends up the sole survivor at the end of the game gets a perfect score on that part of the test, which is 50 points out of the 100 points on the test. So obviously there's a high stakes here in order to win. And I'm going to go over the game with you in just a minute to explain like how you could best win the game. Gambler, why are you standing up? No questions. Okay, what's your question?
Also, we have like, we have like our iPad or other resources. Gabby and how about that?
So
I will go over for you. I will explain everything about the game in just a second, but let's go through each part of the test first, so you know there's 3 parts. So first part of the test is History Survivor. That part is entirely collaborative. It is entirely open note. It is used to measure your critical thinking, your collaboration, your communication. And in that game, you will see that you're going to have to be very strategic about sort of making your final choices and arguing your choices. And then ultimately, there will be one team that is the sole survivor. The second part of our exam will be a Harkness discussion that will happen during the exam. It'll be a 30-minute Harkness discussion worth 10 points. There's a video that when you go to the digital version of this document, you can see I've got the link to it right here. It's a short video about Reconstruction. It's about 19 minutes long. And there is an article, which is also attached to this review packet, called Robber Barons and Rebels, which is sort of about the post-Civil War time period. And we're going to be talking about, was the post-Lincoln, post-Civil War period a successful period or not? And these videos and articles sort of argue both sides of that. And we're going to have a discussion about that in our Harkness for the exam. And then the final part of the test, which will be 45 minutes long, which you will not be able to use any notes or articles or anything for, will be a series of short answer questions that really are going to be 4 separate questions, 10 points each, that tie together some of the big ideas from the stuff we've studied earlier in the class. So at our review sessions, I'll go over some of these. I'll give you some examples and I'll explain how you could do the best you can on this part. But I've given you an example of, this is a question that could be on the test, which you can see where it says, place these 3 images in chronological order, explain their connection to the story of American history that we've studied, and argue the impact of the subject of each of the images. So that's essentially like a paragraph response, but you have to really be able to think kind of critically to be able to make that work. So let's just do that really quick. Like what order would you put these images in based on what we've studied, Alden?
King Jackson first, the picture of the manifest destiny second, and then
Bayonet charge at Little Round Top third.
Yeah, so middle image is first, right-hand image of Manifest Destiny is second, Joshua Chamberlain's charge at Little Round Top is third. So if you were going to answer this question, how would you explain their connection to the story of American history? Like, where does the story of Andrew Jackson fit into the story of American history?
Like the Andrew Jackson part of American history.
Okay, you probably would want to not make that your answer on the test. Very good. So he would fit into sort of the debates about the power of the presidency, how to read the Constitution broadly or strictly. Where does he fit into that? Like, what is this picture showing? He's standing on the Constitution, right? The idea of this president as a king. And we talked about that when we did the trial of Andrew Jackson. So you would sort of briefly explain like that cartoon in the context of that argument about Jackson.
Wait, so it's not about Jackson, it's about like the power.
Right. Yeah. And where would you put the Manifest Destiny picture in this? Like, what's the connection there between the growth of the country? You could even like talk about the telegraph lines we see in the image, like the fact that they're moving west and like they're bringing light to the darkness. It's sort of like they're driving the Indians further west. You can see that all the railroad is moving out there. So new technologies and things. So the growth of the country and how that changes things. And then what's the Chamberlain image? Gettysburg, the turning point of the war, that really pivotal moment when they charge down the hill, right? So you're not going to have to write a lot on that, but you'd have to sort of connect each of those images to something. And I can tell you that I probably will have something or an image or an artifact or something from each time period. I might, for example, put the Join or Die cartoon like on the test and ask you to explain to me like what was the significance of the Join or Die cartoon. So notice how on here I've put the names of each of the units we've studied so far, and then what was the basic idea behind each of those units. That will give you a hint as to sort of what I want you to connect with whatever I ask you, to connect back to those themes that we've studied. So you're not going to have to go back and like memorize anything or go back and study all these things from before. If you've been sort of paying attention along the way to the class and the basic ideas that we've talked about, you shouldn't have any problem tying those things together. But at the review sessions, what I will do for you is I will give you examples like I just did here of what those questions might look like. And some of those examples will be what's on the test. So coming to the review sessions will be very helpful to you. So speaking of the review sessions, let's take a look. If you look at the review sessions, their first review session is next Wednesday after school during extra help time. And then next Friday after school during extra help time. And then there's a special review session next Sunday from 2 to 4. All of these are optional. You do not have to come to them unless you want to, but all of them will help you because I'll give you different examples at each of them. In particular, at the review session, you will notice that if you look at the survivor terms, which I'll put up on the screen in just a second. If you look at the survivor terms here, and I'm going to stop sharing this screen really quick so I can share a different screen. If you look at the survivor terms, let's take a look at that. One of the things about survivor that would be really helpful for you is if you take a look at the terms that are at the bottom of the sheet, you're not going to know which of the teams you're going to be on. So when you come into class on the day of the exam, I'm going to assign you to one of these 4 teams. So let's say you're on team 2, and those are your terms on team 2, right? Those are the cards you're going to have to play on team 2. You are going to want to know about those terms before you walk into the room that day. So look at all those terms, look at all those people, places, events. The more you know about them, the more notes you have about them, the more resources you have about them walking into the test, the better you're going to be able to help your team. So you're not going to know which team you're on until you come into the room. And that's important because as the game progresses and teams throw away terms in the game, your team can pick up terms that other teams have thrown away. And that could prove to be the decisive moment of the game, which I'll explain in just a minute. At the review sessions, I'm going to go over all those terms. I'll answer questions about them. I'll help put them in the context of the larger time period.
So one of the things you can do to help yourself prepare for the test is first watch this video right here, this progress video, which on the digital version of the document will be linkable. You'll just click on it and you can go to it. And you watch that video and it gives you a basic overview of the 4 sets of terms that you can then sort of connect those terms to. So as you study for the test, as you prepare for the test, and you make a Google document that has these terms defined and sort of categorized, that will really help you when you come into the exam itself and you find out who your team is and what you have for notes to share with your team members. Because one of the things I'm going to check in terms of your leadership and your collaboration is what notes did you bring? What facts or notes did you bring to your team? Did you come in and just have nothing for your team, or did you actually have some resources that would really assist your team in the game? All right. So the review sessions will really help you. So just make sure you take note of when those review sessions are. Obviously, the class that meets on Monday, your class is the second test of all the tests. So obviously that's why I'm doing that Sunday review, so that you guys have next Wednesday, next Friday, and Sunday. But then the group that has their test on Thursday, you have additional review sessions. So what I would suggest that you do is I would suggest that, for the people who have their test on Monday, you come to all 3 review sessions because that'll be really beneficial for you. I would suggest that the class that has their test on Thursday, try to come to 3 review sessions. Whichever 3 those are is really up to you. Does that make sense? So coming to 3 review sessions will be really beneficial. But obviously it's up to you. If you feel like you don't need to come to any of them, that's your call. That's your decision. It is in person, right here in this room.
Will we know the people we're working with?
No, nope, not until the day of the exam. Okay. Any questions about that part? All right, now let me explain how Survivor works, just so you can start thinking about it. It's actually really fun, but the way that it works is when you walk into the room, I will assign you to a team. At your team area, there will be 13 cards on the table. All 13 cards will have these terms on them. So the team 1 area, you'll have 13 cards on the table. Those cards will say Bessemer process, Frederick Jackson Turner, Geronimo, Horace Greeley, Horatio Alger, etc. By the way, all of those terms I put in alphabetical order just by the first word of each of the terms. They're not in order of importance or value. They are in alphabetical order. I was very intentional on creating the 4 lists of terms. Each of the lists have terms that are more important, and each of the lists have terms that are less important. Part of the game is figuring out which of the terms are worth more and which of the terms are worth less. And what I mean by that is, secretly, each of these terms has a point value from 1 to 5 points. The terms that are more important are worth 5 points. The terms that are worth less are worth 1 point. The more points you have, the more likely you are to win Final Survivor. What your team needs to do is figure out which are the most valuable cards that you have to play and which ones can you throw away. When you throw away cards, other teams can pick them up. And every time I've ever done this game, teams have thrown away the most valuable cards in the first round. So not knowing or not thinking about the value of terms before the game begins can be very, very detrimental. So for example, what your team wants to do is when you walk into the room, you should know which terms you think are the most valuable terms, because the more of those you get, the higher your score will be at the end of the game. So think about how the game is going to work. In round 1, your team is going to decide sort of which terms are the most important. Now, notice what I've done for you. I've told you to organize your cards into 4 categories: Reconstruction, Westward Movement / Imperialism, Industrial Growth, and the American Dream. So those terms kind of fall into those categories. Some of the terms are going to cover more categories. Those terms are more valuable. So the more impactful a term was, either in promoting progress or hindering progress after the Civil War, the more likely those terms are worth more points. So if you can find a term that covers all 4 categories and had a big impact, that term is worth more points. That term is worth 5 points, for example. So in round 1, you're going to decide which 5 terms you want to throw away. So in round 1, every team is going to throw away 5 of these terms. So that's going to be hard to do because as you go through this list, you've got to decide, like, what do I want to keep? I'm going to throw away Geronimo, Frederick Jackson Turner, Gospel of Wealth, President Grant, and Oh Ho Howard, for example. But other teams might have looked at and said, you know what, Gospel of Wealth is really important. That's probably worth 3 or 4 points. I want to get that from them. So you're going to try to pick those up. But remember, when you pick something up, you got to throw something away. So it's like a really elaborate card game where, like, when you throw cards away, if you throw valuable cards away, other teams can pick up those cards. Your job is to figure out what are the most valuable cards and get as many of them as you can. Does that make sense? Like, that's what you have to do. So then you're going to go through and you're going to argue in the next round, you're going to eliminate 4 more terms so that by the end of the game, you're only going to be left with those 4 terms that you think are the most important, right? So when we finally get to the value, then I'll reveal the values of every card, and then you'll be able to see, like, how much something is worth. Now, in each round, there is actually an option that you can choose. You can ask me in each round to reveal the point value of one of your cards. If you don't use those opportunities, you get a bonus point at the end of the game, like a bonus point towards your total. So in other words, you might want to use, like, let's say you have 5 cards left and you got to get rid of one. You can ask me, like, how much is this card worth, right? And I will tell just you, no one else, just your team, how much that card is worth. And then you could decide we want to keep it or we don't. If you don't use those options, that gives you a bonus at the end of the game because you didn't ask. Does that make sense? So you'd have to decide, is it worth that bonus point we're giving up, or do I really want to know? It would be good to know, because if you know that's a 5-pointer, you want to keep it, right? If it's a 1-pointer, it's worth getting rid of. Like, so it gives you a sense of what really is more important and what's not. Mackenzie?
So to give up the bonus point, all it takes is add a history round, 1 round to ask.
So you only get 2 asks once in each round. So in your first round, when you have all of those, you can ask, right? And I'll tell you 1 card. You're not going to want the other teams to know that, though, because you don't want them to know, like, the value of something. And you're automatically going to have to throw away some things that you don't know the value of, and other teams might be able to figure that out, right? So you can do that. And then in the second round, when you've got that next, you have to get rid of some more cards, you can ask again, right? So for each of those that you don't use, you get a point added at the end of the game. So in other words, you could do it first round and not second round, and you'd still get 1 point added. So, and then at the end, we will add up all of your points from your cards, from any bonus points you get. And then at the end, when you have your final cards, we're going to have a big kind of free-for-all debate about which cards why are your cards so important? Why are your cards more important than the others? And I'll take notes on those arguments, and teams can earn bonus points there as well for the arguments that you make and the defense you make about your terms. And then I will then reveal all of the point values of the cards, and you'll add up your points, and that's how you'll know who wins. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So say your team wins without using all of the tasks.
Yep.
What happens to that bonus point if you're gonna get perfect score?
So the bonus point, the bonus point is only added to your total. Like, we won't know if you win until we add up those points. So in other words, like, everyone's going to get points, like for the game, like your team will have points based on the number of cards they have. And we aren't going to know who wins, like, Survivor, until we know, like, who has the most points.
So
So
bonus point is added to the value of the cards.
exactly.
Is there like rate cap determined on the, like, solely the point value?
Good
So
question.
If it's like, 20 points because there's 4 cards, 5 points max.
Yeah, no, so it's not based only on the cards. Your grade is not the same as the point card total. Like your grade is based on your effective communication, your collaboration, like your ability to sort of critical think and like figure out what cards are the most important. And I'm going to be coming around to each group and listening to your like debate and arguments about that. So, Gabby?
Can you still get a perfect score if you don't win?
You can still, so on this part of the game, no. So out of the 50 points, you can't get a perfect score, but you could still get a good grade, like a good score on it. Like I haven't decided, like it's going to be dependent upon your team and your individual score, but the only group that can get 50 out of 50 on that section would be the team that wins the game.
Wait, but what if I come in second place on that?
Well, maybe then you'd have a 48 out of 50. So if there's a tie, there probably won't be a tie just based on my past experience with this, because part of the final score will be how well you argue. So because I'll be adding some bonus points to the team that argues more effectively than other teams about their points, or like sort of says, here's why all of ours together are more effective than the other teams, or that kind of thing. So it's unlikely there will be a tie, but if there is, I'll figure out a tiebreaker. Okay. Any other questions about Survivor, like how it works? So really I encourage you to come to review sessions. They'll really help you. Start making a Google Doc that has these in it and watch the video. That will help you a lot. Have a great weekend, everyone. See you later.
Yo, Mr. Hughes, can you believe this? I'm about to drive.
What?
That's why I'm staying late.